Few questions in ancient history carry as much modern political weight as this one. Online, you'll find two completely opposite, equally confident claims circulating about the connection between the ancient Philistines and today's Palestinians. One version claims modern Palestinians are the direct, unbroken descendants of the Philistines, an ancient people with no historical relationship to the land's earlier Israelite inhabitants. The other version claims the entire connection is a fabrication, that Palestinians share no meaningful ancestral link to the ancient population at all, and that the name itself is simply a coincidence or a deliberate modern political invention. We now have enough real archaeology and real ancient DNA evidence to actually test both of these claims directly against the evidence, or neither one survives the comparison intact. And what's left once you strip away both exaggerations turns out to be a genuinely fascinating, far more complicated story than either side wants to tell. Claim 1, modern Palestinians are the direct ethnic descendants of the ancient Philistines, full stop. To test this, we need to start with who the Philistines actually were, according to the physical evidence rather than later legend. Around the 12th century BCE, in the chaotic aftermath of a broader Bronze Age collapse that brought down several major Mediterranean civilizations simultaneously, a new population appears in the archaeological record along the southern coast of Canaan, centered on 5 cities, including Ashkelon and Gaza, bringing with them a distinctive material culture and pottery styles closely resembling those found in the Aegean world. The Hebrew Bible explicitly describes this population as originating from Kaftor, a place most scholars identify with ancient Crete. For decades, historians debated whether this represented an actual migration of new people or simply local populations adopting foreign-influenced styles through trade alone, without any real movement of people involved. In 2019, researchers from the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History settled this specific question using ancient DNA extracted from 10 individuals buried at Ashkelon across 3 distinct time periods, made possible by the 2016 discovery of the first confirmed Philistine cemetery ever found. The results, published in Science Advances, showed that individuals buried shortly after the Philistines' documented arrival carried meaningfully more European-related genetic ancestry, roughly 14% on average, compared to the Bronze Age population that came directly before them. That confirms an actual movement of people, not just cultural borrowing, arrived in the region during this period, broadly consistent with the biblical account of a population coming from somewhere in the Aegean world. But here's where Claim 1 collapses entirely. That same study found something equally decisive in the opposite direction. Within roughly 2 centuries, that distinct European-related genetic signal had essentially vanished, diluted back to levels indistinguishable from the surrounding Levantine population through what researchers describe as intensive intermarriage with the much larger local Canaanite population already living in the region. By the time the Philistines appear prominently in later biblical narratives, they were already, at the genetic level, overwhelmingly continuous with their Canaanite neighbors. There is no genetically distinct Philistine population persisting forward through 3,000 years of subsequent history for anyone today to be a direct, unbroken descendant of. The genetic signal that would need to survive for that claim to work disappeared in the ancient world itself, long before anything resembling a continuous lineage to the present day could even be evaluated. Claim 2, the opposite extreme, that modern Palestinians share no meaningful ancestral connection to the ancient population of this land at all, and that the name itself carries no genuine historical weight. This claim runs into 2 separate problems, one linguistic and one genetic, and both are worth examining directly. On the linguistic side, the connection between the word Palestine and the ancient Philistines is genuinely well documented, not invented. The Greek historian Herodotus used a term transliterated as Palestine as early as the 5th century BCE to describe this coastal region, and that name persisted through subsequent Greek and Roman writers before becoming officially attached to the land in 135 CE, when the Emperor Hadrian renamed the Roman province of Judea to Syria Palestina following the suppression of the Bar Kokhba revolt. Historians do genuinely debate the Romans' exact motivation for choosing this specific replacement name, some arguing it deliberately invoked the Philistines as a calculated insult to Jewish national identity, others noting the available evidence for that specific motive is thinner than often claimed, with the name perhaps simply being the most familiar existing Greek and Latin term for the territory. Either way, the name persisted through Byzantine administration, into Arabic as Philastin following the 7th century Muslim conquest, and ultimately into the modern Palestinian national identity used today. That's a real, documented multi-stage linguistic history, not a modern fabrication. On the genetic side, Claim 2 fares even worse against the actual evidence. In 2017, geneticist Mark Haber and his team sequenced genomes from Bronze Age individuals buried at Sidon, a major Canaanite city on the Lebanese coast, and compared them against 99 genomes from present-day Lebanese individuals, finding that modern Lebanese populations derive most of their ancestry directly from the same Bronze Age Canaanite population, demonstrating clear genetic continuity in the region across more than 37 centuries. A broader 2020 study extended this analysis specifically to Palestinians, alongside Lebanese, Jordanians, Syrians, Druze, and Bedouins, finding that Palestinians derive somewhere between 81 and 87% of their genetic ancestry from that same Bronze Age Levantine population, the broader gene pool that includes the Canaanites who absorbed the Philistines themselves within a few centuries of their arrival. Separately, earlier research by geneticist Almet Nebel proposed that a substantial share of Muslim Palestinians likely descend from local populations, including Christians and Jews, who converted following the 7th century Arab conquest, rather than from population groups who physically migrated in from the Arabian Peninsula during that period. None of this supports a story of Palestinians having no meaningful ancestral roots in this specific land. If anything, it supports the opposite: deep, well-documented genetic continuity stretching back thousands of years, predating not just the modern political moment, but predating the Philistines' own arrival in the region as well. So both extreme claims fail for opposite reasons. Modern Palestinians are not the direct, unbroken genetic descendants of a specific, distinct 12th century BCE Aegean migrant population, because that population's distinct genetic signature dissolved into the broader local gene pool within a couple of centuries in the ancient world itself. And modern Palestinians are not a population with no genuine ancestral connection to this land, because the genetic evidence shows the opposite: deep continuity tracing back to the Bronze Age. Canaanite population that has inhabited this specific region for well over 4,000 years, the same broad ancestral pool the Philistines themselves were absorbed into. There's a detail sitting underneath both of these debunked claims that deserves to be the actual headline here, because it gets lost almost every single time this topic gets pulled into modern political argument. The deep genetic continuity found in this research isn't unique to one population. The same 2020 study that found this pattern in Palestinians found a comparable pattern of deep, ancient Levantine genetic continuity across nearly every population group examined from the region, including Lebanese, Jordanians, Syrians, Druze, Bedouins, and multiple Jewish communities, including Ashkenazi, Moroccan, and Iranian Jews. This is not a finding that hands one modern group an exclusive genetic claim to ancient legitimacy while excluding everyone else. It's a finding that shows an extraordinarily long history of population mixing across this region, with most of today's inhabitants across multiple modern national and religious identities, carrying meaningful genetic threads back to the same deep ancestral well. That last point is worth sitting with directly, because it's the part of this story most likely to actually matter to you, regardless of which version of the political argument you've encountered online. Ancient population genetics is an extraordinarily precise tool for answering a very specific kind of question. Where, biologically, did a population's ancestors come from, and how has that ancestry mixed and changed over thousands of years? It is not a tool capable of answering an entirely different kind of question. Who holds a legitimate political or moral claim to a piece of land today? Modern national identity, on every side of every conflict where this kind of argument gets made, is built from shared language, religion, culture, lived history, and self-identification, not from a precise accounting of ancient genetic percentages. Whenever you encounter ancient DNA evidence being used to declare one modern group more indigenous, more legitimate, or more entitled than another, that argument is asking the science to answer a question it was never built to answer. The real evidence here, deep, mixed, overlapping Levantine ancestry running through nearly every modern population connected to this land, doesn't hand a clean victory to either side of the argument it keeps getting dragged into. It just tells a far older, far more interconnected story than either side usually wants it to. There's a third, quieter claim worth addressing directly because it shows up constantly in discussions of this topic without ever being stated quite this explicitly. The assumption that Arab and indigenous to this land are somehow mutually exclusive categories, with Arab identity necessarily implying a recent arrival from somewhere else entirely. The actual genetic and historical evidence complicates that assumption considerably. Arabic became the dominant language of this region following the 7th century Muslim conquest, a genuine and significant historical event involving real migration from the Arabian Peninsula. But language change and population replacement are not the same thing, and the genetic evidence we've already covered shows that the overwhelming majority of the ancestry found in today's Palestinian population traces back to populations who were already living in this specific region for thousands of years before that conquest ever happened. Becoming Arabic-speaking and, over time, predominantly Muslim, represented a profound cultural and linguistic transformation for the people already living across this region, not primarily a wholesale replacement of one population by an entirely different one arriving from elsewhere. The same basic pattern, a population adopting a new dominant language and culture while remaining genetically continuous with its own deep regional history. It shows up repeatedly throughout world history, and there's no strong evidence the Levant represents some unusual exception to that broader, well-documented pattern. It's also worth being honest about the limits of even this more careful, evidence-based version of the story, because good science means acknowledging uncertainty rather than overselling confidence in either direction. Ancient DNA studies in this specific region remain limited by genuinely small sample sizes, a handful of individuals from a handful of sites, compared to the millions of people whose ancestry researchers are trying to characterize across thousands of years. The 2017 Sidon study drew its ancient comparison from 5 individuals. The 2019 Ashkelon study drew its conclusions from 10. These are genuinely significant findings, peer-reviewed and published in serious scientific journals, but they represent an early and still developing picture of an extraordinarily complex regional history, not a final, complete accounting of every population movement and admixture event that has shaped this land over the past 5,000 years. Future studies, recovering DNA from additional sites and additional time periods, will likely refine, and in some cases probably revise, parts of the picture described here, the same way ancient DNA research has continued refining our understanding of population history in nearly every other region of the world it has been applied to. There's one final thing worth saying plainly, because it's the part of this investigation most likely to actually be useful the next time you encounter this topic somewhere online. Whenever ancient population genetics gets invoked in a modern political argument, on any side of any conflict anywhere in the world, it's worth asking the same basic question we've been applying throughout this entire investigation. Does the actual peer-reviewed evidence support a clean, exclusive claim in either direction, or does it show the messier, more interconnected reality that careful science almost always reveals once you look closely enough? In this specific case, the honest answer lands firmly on the side of interconnection. Philistines arrived genuinely from somewhere in the Aegean world, and were genuinely absorbed within a couple of centuries into the much larger Canaanite population already living in this land. Modern Palestinians alongside Lebanese, Jordanians, Syrians, Druze, Bedouins, and multiple Jewish communities all carry meaningful genetic threads back to that same deep, ancient Levantine ancestral pool. Mixed and remixed across more than 4,000 years of recorded and unrecorded history. That's a genuinely remarkable scientific story in its own right, one that deserves to be understood and appreciated on its own terms, rather than conscripted into service for a modern political argument that the evidence, examined honestly, simply refuses to resolve in either direction.